London. Yes, this was my first announcement. I should warn you that this meeting is going to be recorded. So if for some reasons you prefer to switch your camera off, you can do it, or if you prefer to keep it on, it's even better. Several announcements before I properly introduce Tali, and they are, first of all, the lecture is in Yiddish, which is such a great pleasure. If at the same time we have interpretation, our today's interpreter is Izzy Posen, and in a second, after in actually 2 minutes, you will see the opportunity to switch to English channel. The way of doing it is on the bottom of your screen, you see the globe to the right, and under the globe, it's written interpretation. Please don't mind weird words in the list, but just if you press English there.
Sorry, Sonia, can I just interrupt to say you can't see it yet, but you will once Sonia is able to.
You cannot see it yet. I'm just describing what you will be able to see in a couple of moments. And then if you choose English, then you would be able to hear only Easy translating Tali from Yiddish to English. So during the announcement number 3, during the talk, we ask you kindly to mute yourself so that we can hear Tali good enough. But after the talk, everyone will have an opportunity to ask their questions. And at this moment, and everyone can unmute him or herself to ask questions, to make commands, to chat. And before this time, during the talk, if you have any questions, you are welcome to use chat box. You do have access to it on the bottom of your screens, in the middle, more or less. You can write your questions there. After the talk, either I can ask you to present your question yourself, or if you prefer, I can just read your question from the chat box. I think that's it. So just several words about Tali. Tali is a lecturer at UCL, University College London. He's lecturing mainly about Jewish spirituality. He's an author of numerous articles and books. One of them is Communicating the Infinite, the Emergence of Habad School, which is closely connected to today's lecture. And one more book I wanted to mention, it was published this year, 2020, and its title is Hasidism Beyond Modernity, Essays in Habad Thought and History. So whether you have any questions, you also can ask us in private chats, me, Zoe Belk, and Lily Khan, and we can answer you, or just in the chat box for everyone. So thank you. Then I think, Tali, I give you the mic.
And
when you have to switch on interpretation.
I did.
Right. Sonia, I need to be co-host so that I can record on my computer.
Done?
Das ist was mit abgerät.
Ja.
Okay.
Gemacht?
Ja. Okay. Fine. Ja. Okay, sehr gut. Ich habe PowerPoint. Ich darf das finden. Und Share Screen. So ein Moment. Ich finde Share Screen Funktion. Und da ist the PowerPoint. Okay. So
Okay.
again, so the Anfang from the
We'll go to the beginning of the PowerPoint with God's help. I called this lecture the Pom-padicle, from boys to girls, Yiddish in the schools in Lubavitch Habad in London. This is the building, the new building, as it's being called. from the 1970s, the new building. Before this building, there were two old buildings. And afterwards, we bought this building. And we thought that we'll make one of the buildings will be for the girls and the other will be for the boys. So we thought this building that you see now on the screen will be for the boys, for the girls, and the other building will make a new building for the boys. That's what we thought. This was in 1966. But when we showed this plan to the Rebbe said, no, the new building will be for the girls. Yeah. Oh. So we have these two schools, the school for the boys and the school for the girls. Now the question is, which type of community is there of Lubavitch in London? So the Lubavitch community in London is now a mixture of old Lubavitch families from Russia and the English Orthodox community who became Lubavitch, and people who have returned to the faith. That is the Lubavitch community. The messengers of the Lubavitcher Rebbe saw as their mission to set up schools for boys and girls separately, and this is after the youngest years in kindergarten. The sexes will be separated. Amongst the kids in the school, there are kids from the Lubavitch community, but also kids from other families, and also Sephardi kids. This is how it's now. But when you go back to the beginning of the Lubavitch school in London, around 1960, the Lubavitch Cheder and later the Lubavitch school, they then had mainly kids from English families. So there weren't many Russian, and they were mainly kids from English families. And they did not speak Yiddish at home. In a Hasidic Cheder in general, in a Hasidic school, the main teaching for boys, for young boys, after they learn the alphabet, is Khumash, the 5 books of Moses. After this, they learn the Siddur, the prayer book, but mainly to say the words clearly. Later, they learn the Mishnah, which is quite deep and logical. Afterwards, they learn the Talmud, which is even more difficult. And for that, you need a good teacher who knows how to make it that the kids should have what is called a Gemara kop, a Gemara head. But the main teaching for boys is Khumash, the 5 books of Moses. This is what they need to learn and understand. Now is the question, how do you learn Khumash? How do you translate the Khumash? In which language? So you say the words of the Khumash in Hebrew, Vayomer Hashem, and then you say the translation. But on which language should you translate? Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said. So that was in Yiddish. Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said, that's English. But which translation should we use in the school? This is the million-dollar question. The way I understand it, the Lubavitcher School for Boys, they started to translate in English. Vayomer Hashem, or Hashem said. That's how they translated. That's how it was in the beginning. then the kids were either children of English families. They were children of English families. Some of them they were from religious families, but they're from English families, and people who speak English at home. But afterwards came kids from families that speak Yiddish at home. Probably families from Russian Lubavitch Hasidim. And also very interesting, parents who don't speak Yiddish want that the kids should speak Yiddish. That is very complex. The parents speak English at home and don't even know how to speak Yiddish, but they send the kids to Lubavitch school and they want that the boys should speak, they want the boys should come out and speak and know Yiddish. Therefore, there was pressure that the Khumash should be taught with Yiddish translation, even though most of the kids don't understand Yiddish. The director of education in the Lubavitch institutions in London was Reb Aaron Dov Safran, may his memory be of blessing. He traveled to the Rebbe in New York in 1965, and he asked, when he was on a private audience with the Rebbe, what he should do. So the Rebbe answered, it's better that the kids should learn Torah in a language that they understand. But they should make it a custom that in the playground and in their free times in the day, that they should then speak Yiddish. In addition, that stories should be told in Yiddish. That's what the Rebbe said. According to the teacher, Moshe Levi, the problem was that most teachers didn't speak Yiddish at home. The teachers are young men from Lubavitch. They're from Orthodox families. They know Torah and they know how to read books, but they don't speak Yiddish at home. And that was part of the problem. When you translate Yiddish, you write it. They're the words in Hebrew, and you can think, what's the translation? And you can write it on a sheet. But when it comes to telling stories, to tell a story, if you read a story, it's good. But saying a story, when you need to explain and you need to describe, for that you need a deep understanding of Yiddish. And an important cause in the whole thing about Yiddish in London was the big chassid and influencer, Reb Mendel Futterfass. Here he's sitting at a Fabrengen. He is sitting with Hasidim and he's telling stories. Very charismatic person. Very famous person. He came to live in London around 1964, maybe a little earlier. He was in the concentration camp in Russia for 9 years. The whole time, he sacrificed himself to keep kosher and other commandments of the Torah, which he as far as he could. When Mr. Wilson came for an official visit in Russian in 1962, he was asked that he should do a special request with the government to release Reb Mendel from Russia. So he was no longer in the concentration camp, but he was still in Russian, and they asked him to ask that they should release Remendel from Russia so he can be reunited with his wife and his children in London. This was Mr. Wilson, and that's what Mr. Wilson did, and thank God it was successful. So Remendel came to London. He made a big change to the situation of learning Yiddish in the Lubavitcher school. When Remendel heard that they learn in English, he gave advice. Make 2 streams, 2 sects. In one stream they'll teach Khumash on English, and in the other stream they'll learn on Yiddish. For Remendel, Yiddish and Judaism go together. Of course, to make a second stream will cost money. And in the beginning, the management of the Lubavitch house didn't want it. It was too expensive. We don't have the money. But Remendel asked powerfully, and the power of his charisma was so big that in the end they agreed. The new stream where they learned Khumash in Yiddish was called Alei Torah. They made special boxes to gather money to support Alei Torah. And Muli Liberov, the son-in-law of Remendel, also took upon himself to get money for Alei Torah. And that means to gather money in order to be able to teach Khumash in Yiddish. In this picture, you see Moli Shmuel Liberov with his father-in-law, Remendel, and they're waiting to go in on a private audience with the Rebbe. This is a picture in 770 in Crown House. The mezuzah that you see there, that's the mezuzah on the door of the Rebbe's private audience room. They're waiting, they're saying Tehillim or something, or maybe they're learning a bit of Hasidus. Maybe Moli is learning Hasidus, and Mendel is saying to him, that's what it looks like. Very good Jew. Now it's worth to talk a bit about the Lubavitch community in that time in London. That is the 70s and the 80s. To understand the background of what is happening in the school. This idea of 2 streams, we can see that manifests in various ways. Firstly, in Lubavitch house itself, there were 2 synagogues. In the upstairs one, the rabbi was Reb Nachman Sudak of blessed memory, OBE. He was the main messenger of the Rebbe to England. The speech that he gave every Shabbos was in Yiddish. The Rebbe's the thing that he said from the Rebbe were also in Yiddish. The Sikhs from the Rebbe are written in Yiddish and printed in Yiddish, but when he spoke them, he also said them in Yiddish. And his explanations were all in Yiddish. This is the upstairs synagogue. The downstairs synagogue, the leader of that synagogue was Aaron Dov Safran that we mentioned before. His speeches were in English. His lectures that he gave were also in English. Even when he took a book that was written in Yiddish, for example, the speeches of the Rebbe, he translated that in English and explained in English. Now back to the upstairs synagogue. In the upstairs synagogue, there were also 2 streams. So there's the upstairs synagogue, the downstairs synagogue, and in the upstairs synagogue, there were 2 streams. Between Mincha and Maariv, Friday evening and Saturday afternoon, between Mincha and Maariv, there were 2 lectures that learnt the speeches of the Rebbe. The speeches are printed in Yiddish, but in one lecture, they said it in Yiddish, and the explanations and the translation was all in Yiddish, and that's the second lecture, everything was in English. Saturday morning before the prayer, they studied Hasidism, deep stuff. And then there were 2 lectures. One was in English and one was in Yiddish. Interestingly, the Reb Nachman Sudak, he gave the lecture in English in this Hasidic thing that they learned before the prayer. Years later, there was another stream. Not only is there English and Yiddish, and there was another one, Hebrew. So now there's Hebrew as well. Later, the 2 synagogues merged and became one synagogue for some time. And that's because Safran moved to Ilford, and he no longer lived in Stamford Hill. And therefore, they made from both minyanim one minyan. And in this minyan, they made several compromises. One of the main compromises, sadly, was that the speech is in English. And therefore, when the speech was in Yiddish, when the children listen to the speech, they heard it in English. Lots of kids go out when the rabbi says a speech, but the kids who were there heard in English. But it's a chance that a boy or girl should hear a speech in English. But when they brought together both of these prayer groups, the speech was in English, and that's how it remained. An important thing in the community, especially on Shabbos, was the Farbrengen, the gatherings. After the prayer, you sit together, just like it was with their Mendel. Reb Nachman Sudak spoke in English and in Yiddish. When he read for the gathering the last speech of the Rebbe, that was in Yiddish. And when Mendel spoke at a gathering, when that was very, very exciting that Mendel spoke and told a story, and he used to cry when he spoke, that was in Yiddish. So this is one aspect of the background for a child that grows up in the Lubavitch community in the 70s and 80s. Now there's another aspect. This is a picture of a room in 770 in Eastern Parkway. 770, that's the Rebbe's house. What are all these telephones? In the 70s, they began that when the Rebbe speaks in the weekdays, so that's not on the Sabbath or on festivals, but in the weekdays, when the Rebbe speaks from the microphone in 770, and there were microphones anyway when it was in the weekdays, so they made it so that they can hear the Rebbe. So they made it from the microphone, it goes in the telephone, and on the other side of the telephone, could be to Israel, it could go to other cities in America, it can go to South America, to England, to Europe, to France, and that's how it was. There was a similar room in London. In London, the line came from New York, and from there, it got spread in various places in England. This is called in Hebrew a shiddur, and in English a hookup. Both words. So Eliezer Kalman Tiefenbrohm is a Jew who lived in London of blessed memory. Very interesting person. He was an artist, and this is some of the paintings that he painted. He painted lots and lots of rabbis from all kinds of communities, from Lubavitch, from Satmar, even opposes to Hasidim, Sfadim. And they say in every house in Stamford Hill, there's a painting from Eliezer Kalman Tiefenbrohm. And it doesn't matter which community or sect. He had the idea in the beginning that there should be the hookups. The idea comes from him. So he made it that there should be a telephone line from New York to London. And Ben-Zion Hackner of blessed memory, Ben-Zion and his brother, Jonathan Hackner, they set up the whole thing in London, that you could hear the Rebbe. The Rebbe's gatherings began 9:30 in the evening. And that's 2:30 in the morning in London. And that was very, very special for the children. That they wake up 2 o'clock and you come and you go to a gathering to hear the Rebbe. You couldn't see in those days. This is in the 70s and 80s. But later they added sight as well. And that was very expensive to see. But back then you could hear. And how did you pay for a line from New York to London by telephone? This is very expensive. So there was a good Jew who worked on the stock exchange, and he had an open line from London to New York, and he gave that line to Lubavitch so that in the middle of the night they can use this line from London to New York to hear the Rebbe. Here's a table from places in France. I found this from France. There's a table for where the transmission, the hookup, comes. And it's similar in England, various places. And that's how the children came. Mostly they didn't understand what he said because the Rebbe spoke in Yiddish. But the kids sat there and tried. They heard the Rebbe said the word Shabbos, so they write Shabbos. They heard the Rebbe said Shabbos in the free, Shabbos morning, so they wrote that. Whatever they heard from the Rebbe, they wrote it down. Another thing, and this comes from the Rebbe. This is a series of books. The Rebbe Retze Kinder, the Rebbe speaks to children. And here there is a speech about Hanukkah in the book. The Rebbe speaks to children. This is taken from the speeches of the Rebbe, and they printed it so that kids could learn it. There was also an old thing, and this is chats with young children. And this was started in the 40s in New York. And it went on for 50 years, and that's, you can see from 81. And you can see here an article, The Wonders of Nature, about birds, how the birds come out of the nest and other things. they say there's a rumor, I don't know if it's true, but they say that the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, she wrote the pictures of the nature, but I don't know if it's true or not. Another thing, and this is something that many kids read, are these are the Machanayim books. Machanayim made nice books in 2 languages. Every story, actually 3 languages. Every story you could buy in Yiddish, in Hebrew, or in English. And it was the same stories, the same pictures, but the language was either Yiddish, Hebrew, or English. One of my sons, he told me that he learned a lot from these Machanayim books. And he said the big difference between the Machanayim books and the one we saw, and this one, the chats with children, that in the chats with children, they don't have the pointings on the letters, but the Machanayim books has the pointings on the letters, the vowels, so it's easier for kids to read. So that's why he really liked to read it. Now we come back to the school. Moshe Levi, he became a teacher in the Lubavitch school in London in 1968. Here's a picture of Moshe Levi with the Rebbe. Moshe, so keep in mind that there's the Ala Torah stream where you learn Chumash in Yiddish translation. So this is what he made. He made thousands of pages of Yiddish translation. In order to give this seminar, I spoke with people to find some of these pages, and I put them here. So here, this is a Khumash sheet with words or phrases. In one column is the Hebrew from the Khumash, and in the other column is the Yiddish. So there's Hebrew from the Khumash and the Yiddish translation. Here's another example from one of these sheets. You can see here, Kisa Zeria, Azivet Schwangeren, the older Inzive geboren. If a woman will become pregnant and will give birth. Sonia's just asking Tali to make it larger. So Sonia's asking Tali to make the page of presentation larger so that people can read it. This is big enough? Yes, thank you. This is much better. I'm sorry. So this is the Khumash translation sheets, as we call them, that Moshe wrote. He used to put in small pictures. This is before there was copying, or copies were very expensive. He made this on a wax sheet. And they made copies by turning. It was a whole system. And here's another sheet from Arle Torah. Now, he himself said that there's a big problem because the children don't know Yiddish. You translate the Hebrew from the Khumash into Yiddish, but the children don't know Yiddish. They don't hear Yiddish at home. So what shall we do? They can't even read Yiddish. Therefore, you can see here Khumash sheet. But here there's Hebrew, Vayomer, Yiddish, und hat gesagt. And then there's the transliteration, und hat gesagt, and then the English, and he said. And he made, I asked him if he can find, but he didn't find. But he made a lot of these Khumash sheets in 3 languages. And he made them in 3 different colors. And it was very wonderful. That in one color was the Hebrew, and then the second color was the Yiddish, and the third color was the English. But here there's another level because it has the transliteration. And here you have this. Here you have it in typed with a computer, probably. And you can see Vayivra, und hat baschaffen, Elohim Gott, Sataninim, the größte fish, and there's small pictures of fish there. Can you see? Small pictures. Hagedolim, die Größe, Be'eskol Nefesh, und jeder Zel. And this is the same thing. There's the Hebrew, the Yiddish, the transliteration, how to say it in Yiddish, and then the English. That was Moshe Levi. There was meant to be another picture from Ritchie Witkes. Ritchie Witkes, he went to the next level in the Lubavitch school. Because he started a thing that in his class, you only speak Yiddish. A child wants to go to the bathroom, he has to ask in Yiddish. A boy needs to go home early, he needs to say it in Yiddish. The teacher doesn't understand English. That was Ritchie Witkes. I'm sorry that I don't have a picture of him. I wanted to, but it didn't work out. So this is something Ritchie instated, a whole class where you only speak Yiddish. In a junior school, the school for young kids, it's one teacher the whole time, or at least half of the time. And he spoke the whole time Yiddish with the kids. And every kid that went through his class, and I think it was year 5, not the oldest class in the school, in the junior school, but close to the oldest class, every kid that went through his class got some knowledge of Yiddish. And this stays with them. And afterwards, several things happened. The Rebbe died in 94. Various discussions about the whole thing of Yiddish in schools all over again. The Rebbe sent this letter or another letter. The point is that just knowing Torah is not enough. So the rabbi of the community, Dayan Itchy Ruskin, it was his opinion that the best thing that the boys should learn in English so that they can understand well the Khumash. I remember one boy. He translated in Genesis. He was in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve was in the Garden of Eden. So this boy thought that Adam was together with a frog, because he didn't know that Freu in Yiddish means a wife and not a frog. So the Dayan Itchy Ruskin thought that the boys should learn Khumash in English. and the Gemara, the Talmud also in English, the Mishnah also in English. If you want to speak Yiddish, that's good. Like the Rebbe said, tell them stories in Yiddish, tell them to speak Yiddish in playground, let them hear Yiddish when the Rebbe speaks, which is a nice thing. You can come and hear the Rebbe speaking in Yiddish, and you learn the Rebbe's talks. So that's how it became that the whole thing of Olei Torah stopped, and now there's only one stream, and we learn Khumash in English. That's what happened with the boys. Now we can see the pendulum, and we go to the girls. This is Rebbetzin Goldie Unique. She is the head of Jewish Studies in the Lubavitch High School for Girls. Roughly in the 70s, there was almost no Yiddish for the girls. They learned a bit. There were some books where they tried, but Goldie Unique instated that you learn the talks of the Rebbe in Yiddish. The thing about Abraham was that he was the first who didn't. Okay, I'm not translating this. This is Yiddish from the Rebbe's talk. So this she instated in the school. In 4 years. So this is classes 7, 8, 9, and 10 until year 11. Well, then it's the GCSE year. But until then, you learn the Rebbe's talks in Yiddish. And only the beginners learn the talks in Hebrew. But the main thing is to learn the talks in Yiddish. And that's what she instated. When I thought about this lecture, I spoke with various people about their experiences with Yiddish. And one of them is my daughter. And she describes I've also spoken with Ritchie Witkes. So he says as follows. I was in action. I insisted that we should speak Yiddish in the class. So this is from my interview with Ritchie. It wasn't the policy of the school. Once there was a gathering of messengers of the Rebbe in Europe, Reb Nachman Sudak came from the gathering and said that they made a decision the children should speak Yiddish in the school. So he said this to the headmaster. So various months later, he asked the headmaster if the boys speak Yiddish. So he said, I told the teachers to speak Yiddish with the kids, but no. But they didn't do it. So Levi Perez, who only speaks Yiddish and he can't even speak English, so he asked, in which language did he say this to the teachers? Because the teachers themselves don't understand Yiddish, and that was the problem. So he says an interesting thing, Rishi. He has a good understanding of these various ways in which Yiddish is spoken. When the Rebbe speaks Yiddish in a gathering, he speaks the Yiddish that is spoken nowadays. He speaks a regular Yiddish, which has lots of Hebrew in it, a bit of English. But when the Rebbe speaks to women, he spoke more Yiddish and less Hebrew. And the same with children. So how was it in the class of Ritchie Witkes? If the child asks a question in English, Ritchie would tell him, you need to ask in Yiddish. And he had on his desk, he always had this dictionary, the Weinreich dictionary. And this very book was on the table of Ritchie Witkes. And when he spoke in the class and somebody didn't know a word in Yiddish, he himself would say the word, would look for the word in the dictionary. Later, he moved to New York. And interestingly, Chaim Gerada, the Yiddish writer, had a connection with Lubavitch Rebbe, and Ritchie Witkes was one of these who the Rebbe sent to the house of Chaim Gerada and to give him matzah before Passover and various things. Because Ritchie has a love to Yiddish. And it's a very nice thing. This was from the interview with Ritchie. I also spoke with my daughter, Noam, Leah. She's now a messenger from the Rebbe who lives, I didn't pick up the name. So she told me, Sweden, she's in Habad in Sweden. So she told me a story that her coming with me to the gatherings in the middle of the night, it was very important for her. And they used to sit there and play because she was a child, but she heard Yiddish. She heard the Yiddish of the Rebbe. That was important. That was very important for her. When she was 14 years old, she had a dream. The dream was of the Rebbe. The Rebbe is giving out dollars. Where is he giving out dollars? In the room in Lubavitch house where she heard these gatherings from the Rebbe. But when you hear the gatherings, you don't see anyone, you only hear. But here in the dream, she saw the Rebbe and the Rebbe's giving out dollars. So she goes to the Rebbe and the Rebbe gives her $1. And he says to her, do you speak Yiddish? And she said, a bit. So the Rebbe says, you should speak Yiddish. Therefore, her and her husband, when they got engaged, they spoke about what's going to be in the future with the kids. So they decided that they're going to speak Yiddish to the kids. And her children, they speak Yiddish together. And just like a friend said, even when the kids fight, they fight in Yiddish. So thank God we came to the end of the time that we have. It's really a project that this is the beginning of a very interesting project to see how Yiddish is spoken and how it's read in the Lubavitcher communities in London. And I hope that this is useful for you.
Right? Okay.
Should I stop recording?
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, I think we can record the questions too.
We'll record it. All right. So,
so I will ask on behalf of Jessica Cheltenham. And this is the question I wanted to ask myself too. When you were showing materials from Moshe Levy, he written down with his own hand, so written Hebrew and Yiddish was in square script. It wasn't in the cursive. And the reason is that kids do not at this stage know cursive. They know only Hebrew script.
But it should be easier for them. It should be easier. He didn't want to make another difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it should be easy.
And at which stage, just if you remember, if you know it, at which stage kids in Cheder do they learn script, like writing, writing with the hand?
That's interesting. I think that from the beginning of school, as soon as they're learning to write, they write script.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I've never taught that age. I teach older girls.
Okay. Thank you very much. Then can I ask Zoe to ask her question, please?
I can't remember what we agreed on. Is it okay if I ask in Yiddish, or is that complicated?
Yes, it's okay if you ask in Yiddish. Easy can translate it after you ask.
Okay.
So we can translate herself. I mean, do you want to ask?
But it's better with you. It's like the proper interpretation.
I don't mind.
Okay. So, wenn es bewiesen the taytsh bichelach, sie given auf Lashon Kodesh mit Pintalach, mit der Kides, auf Yiddish mit vielen Kides, the Transliteratio auf Englisch ist und später der Englisch. So, man schaut ist, ob die Kinder können lernen Lashon Kodesh mit Pintalach, und ob der Yiddish ist geschrieben mit vielen Pintalach, was darf man bechlal the transliteration, the Transliteratio? So why do you need the transliteration? Sorry.
It's an interesting question.
Should I, Tali, should I translate the question first?
Okay.
Yeah, Lily asked, she saw that the Hebrew in the sheets were written with the vocalizations, with the pointings, the vowels, and so was the Yiddish. So she asked if they can read the Hebrew with the pointings and they know how to pronounce that, then surely they will know how to pronounce the Yiddish as well if it has vocalization. So why did they need the transliteration as well?
I think because the Yiddish, even if it's got points, is just less familiar for many of them. You see the Hebrew, when you get used to it, you see vayomer, and you recognize that word, and it's got points, but you glance at the points, but you know it's vayomer. But a phrase in Yiddish, they haven't yet got used to it. Or for the sake of one who hasn't yet got used to it, just to make it that little bit easier. That's
Any other questions? Zwei Scheiles du? Wo sind denn zwei Scheiles?
Avi.
Ich will zwei.
Ja.
Wie viel ihr versteht, wo ist der Matzif in andere Länder, in Lubavitcher Schulen, wo scheich Jiddisch, in Jiddisch und wo die zweite Scheile ist, wenn uns sich bechlal aufgestellt die Opposition zu Jiddisch, zu Englisch wie taytsh in Habad bechlal, wenn uns sich aufgestellt die Opposition zu dem.
So Felix was asking what's the situation with Yiddish in other countries other than England, and secondly, when the opposition to translating Khumash into English, when that opposition stopped?
Jede country, jeder Land bedarf forschen, jeder Land besonder. Ich habe geredet mit einer von meinen Einiglich in Crown Heights. Sie lernt jetzt in Crown Heights. Sie kommt von Dänemark. Sie ist noch am Mishpacha von meiner Einiglich, wo sie reden Yiddish in Stub, aber auch in Englisch. mein Sohn, Tate, redt zu den Kindern, also haben sie abgerät. Mein Sohn redt zu sie auf Englisch und die Mama redt zu die Kinder auf Yiddish. Jetzt ist sie in New York und sie ist eine Lehrerin in New York. Aber sie sagt, dass es ist für eine gewisse Schule in New York, wo man lernt alles auf Yiddish, a viele Biologie auf Yiddish. Die ganze Sache ist auf Yiddish. Nicht nur teure lernen auf Yiddish, aber auch sogenannte säkulare Sachen auch auf Yiddish. Aber das ist ein Schule. Aber man darf sehen in jeder Schule, in jeder Ort, es wird sein etwas anderes.
So Tali said that you need to research every place separately, and he indeed knows a school where they teach everything in Yiddish, even biology is taught in Yiddish.
Ja, und die Opposition zu der taytsh auf Englisch, das ist gewesen in den 60s oder die früh in den 70s mehr gemacht, aber das ist gewesen in zwei Strömen. In zwei Strömen. Ein Strom ist die Alle-Teure, wo man taytscht auf Yiddish, und die andere Strom die ganze Zeit mit taytscht auf Englisch.
So the opposition, that was in the 60s, and even then it wasn't two streams, one stream in Yiddish and one stream in English.
The next question, I think Avi had a question, right? No?
Okay.
Then Ellie Robin. Ellie, can I ask you to unmute yourself and ask you?
Hi. So I'm a product of the Lubavitch schools in London. So two comments. One is, so I was in the 1990s, early to mid 1990s, I was in the primary school. And at that time, I think some of the years, from what I remember, some of the years, there were two streams for Khumash, Yiddish taytsh and English taytsh. I think that was maybe third grade, class 3. But there was also the same dynamic that you described in the earlier years, where there was kind of a, let's say, a bit of controversy with some people pushing for more Yiddish and some people pushing for more English. That was definitely playing out, and I felt that in my childhood there was pressure on my parents to put me in the Yiddish stream, even though I didn't speak any Yiddish. So I remember that very clearly. It was a big issue, and for 1 year I was in the Yiddish stream, and I was miserable. But eventually I did learn Yiddish, and apart from that, also there was exposure to Yiddish from, I think, grade 1, when we first started learning Khumash. And we first started learning script, like you said, the cursive script was taught around the same time we started Khumash. We were also introduced to basic Yiddish vocabulary, and I think that was as an entire class. If I remember correctly, there may have, again, been two streams for maybe Yiddish language and English language. And there was a lot of, I think, between the parents and between the staff, and, you know, I think what I remember is a lot of confusion and kind of pressure from different sources going one way or another way. So I don't think that ever stopped. I don't know what the situation is now. So that's some comments. My question is a side question. You mentioned Rabbi Mendel Futfas, coming from Russia with Harold Wilson being instrumental in bringing him over. So this is, you know, I've seen this mentioned in various places. I've heard it from various people. My grandfather actually told me that he went to a Kiddush in Stamford Hill to celebrate and this was when his wife was pregnant. Uncle. So this is, you know, a long time before I was ever thought of. I went to Kiddush to celebrate Mendel's release from Soviet Russia. So my question is, do you have any further details about who lobbied, you know, how did that happen? Who lobbied Harold Wilson? What was going on behind the scenes? Do you have any details about that?
It's Harold Wilson went when he was the shadow. Labor was not in power, when he went to Russia. He was I don't even think he was the head of the Labour Party at that point, possibly. He had a senior position, but he went on an official visit. Now, who lobbied him, I'm afraid I don't know. I would suspect Freilich Vogel, and he would certainly be the person to ask, because he would know about it, and very likely he was the person.
Thank you.
Now I can see a question from someone in the chat.
Right.
Margalit.
Margalit, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello. No, I'm too afraid my English accent is terrible and my Yiddish one is even more terrible.
So you can use both.
Okay. Well, I would like, as I wrote, I'm interested in didactics, and I would like to know if today in the school, it's if pupils have handbooks and if they learn Yiddish as we learn French in French schools and as pupils in England learn English. And if yes, if there is such a class, what kind of material do they use?
That's a very good question, Margalit. The problem is the school, which it never was before, but in recent years, all the schools have become state aided. And the state concept of education differs quite considerably. And for example, in the girls' high school, they wanted to stop studying French, which I thought was terrible. But it gives, some sort of idea as to the sort of what you might call the narrow-minded state school, learning trust, all these organizations. So I think they do not want Yiddish taught in the boys' school. But what I am thinking, as a class, you see, there's a big problem that we have, that we want to teach the regular Kodesh curriculum. That means studying Torah, let's say for boys, Khumash, Mishnah, Gemara, and all, for girls, whatever the equivalent. And also we have to do a full secular curriculum as well. So it means we have to do twice as much as, we have to fit in twice as much into one day than an ordinary school has to do, or approaching twice as much. So to spare a lesson to where you learn Yiddish, they may not agree. I mean, years ago, when we were not aided, we were just recognized. There is a GCSE, so Avi mentioned. So there's a
It's Tali frozen, I think.
Sorry, some technical problems.
Yeah, I wonder if I can, in the meantime, answer, as somebody who did go to a cheder where they did teach Yiddish properly. Yes, to answer Magali's question, we did have textbooks and we did learn Yiddish, and Yiddish was taught, and some grammar rules and practice and things like that.
Okay, great, thank you. Can I ask you, while we lost the person who is supposed to talk, what kind of material did you use, or did you get from the teacher, and was that the same Yiddish as the standardized Yiddish that is taught in like non-religious organizations?
Not quite. No. It's a Hasidic variety of Yiddish, which our team is researching. But we had textbooks and practice sheets and all these kinds of things, and some grammar rules, not extensive grammar rules, but some grammar rules. But they're a bit different than the standard Yiddish.
I think it's probably more like what English speakers learn in English class than like what French speakers learn in French class.
Tali should be back in a second. Right.
And maybe in the meantime, we could hear a little bit from Hannah Hannah and Hannah, I don't know your sister's name, but would the both of you want to say a little bit about your experiences, like quite recent and current experiences with Yiddish in Chabad schools in London?
Sure. I mean, I kind of avoided Yiddish while I was at Lubavitch. But I'm learning standard Yiddish at university, and it's very fun. So I did like all the sichos and stuff that we learned in school. I did in Hebrew to avoid doing it in Yiddish. But we did have, when we did do Yiddish, we had like vocabulary tests and a bit of grammar and stuff like that. But I think my sister's in like the top Yiddish group, so she learns stuff in Yiddish. So.
Yeah, so we do Yiddish, we do like the sichas in Yiddish, and we have to translate what we know. And then if we don't know, we're going to ask the teacher. And at the end, she gives us a few words, and then we have a test on it every single week.
They're fine.
Shane, I'm done.
So yeah, that's about it.
Tali is back, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. As my computer suddenly switched off. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to try and lobby for a kind of a Yiddish club with the children, the boys in the boys' school. You know, that maybe there could be a Yiddish club, something like that. You know, after school or on Zoom or something of that kind. You know, so I think this, preparing for this discussion that we're having this evening, you know, I'm thinking of trying to, and I've spoken to several of the teachers about it. You know, this thing, because I was asking people, you know, what's your experience teaching Yiddish and stuff like that. So I think if we could make some kind of Yiddish club would be a good thing.
Easy?
Yeah, Tali, don't you think in Stamford Hill, given that pretty much all non-Chabad schools for boys do speak and teach in Yiddish as the main language, don't you think that that's even more of a problem, because parents who do want their children to speak Yiddish, even Chabad parents, can just send their kids to other Chadorim in Stamford Hill, which means that the Yiddish speaking gets even more diluted away from the Chabad school.
So you're saying that if a parent wants their children to speak Yiddish, they'll send their children to a non-Chabad school, and that will mean that the child will not, that a potential Yiddish speaker in the Chabad school is now not there. Well, you're right, except that the Chabad community tend to be quite focused on getting a Chabad education, you know, so for example, learning sichos, you know, like Hannah just mentioned. So the whole idea of learning things which connect to the Lubavitch teachings, which they won't get in another cheder. But certainly there are children who went to other chedarim, and you're right that, you know, that would have that kind of effect. Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting thing, is the way that the Yiddish environment in Stamford Hill has got stronger and stronger. So 30 years ago, if you heard a mother speaking to her children, most likely she would speak to them in English. Nowadays, most likely she's speaking in Yiddish.
Yeah, both of my parents grew up speaking English at home, and me and my siblings all spoke Yiddish at home. And it's the same for many of my friends. It's very common in Stamford Hill.
And can you give an explanation for that?
Well, I would say yes, because in the beginning, after the Holocaust, the community was quite small, wasn't institutionalized as such. So even Hasidic parents would send kids to non-Hasidic schools. There was a Witkes school in Stamford Hill, and you know, all the Chadorim that we know now came much later. So I think all the kids were just speaking English. You know, it's actually quite common in many other immigrant communities where the first generation is quite keen to just, you know, adopt the language of the country, and only later, when it gets bolstered and comfortable and more brazen, you know, builds its own institutions, does it start going back to its roots. So yeah, it's really only the last couple of decades that we've seen, you know, that Stamford Hill, the default is now Yiddish.
I think an education inspector visiting our school mentioned to the headmaster, to the principal, that there are 47 languages in Stamford Hill, or in Hackney, 47 languages.
There is one more question from
Lily's looking
Schwartz.
eager. She's going to learn all for
Yeah. Can I ask Philip Schwartz to unmute himself and to ask?
Yeah, sure.
Can
Thank
you
you
show
for the interest.
yourself, Philip? I owe you a letter.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the interesting talk. I had a question to Hannah's sister, who talked earlier about her. I apologize for not for asking her, but I wanted to know whether you said you were translating or you were reading the sichos and translating them. Do you read them in Yiddish and translate them into English, or do you read them in Lashon Kodesh and then translate them into Yiddish?
So we read them in Yiddish and then translate them into English. Only sometimes we do it in Hebrew, but usually it is in Yiddish.
Okay, and do you also speak Yiddish usually during the lessons, or is the language of instruction English?
No, we don't really speak Yiddish. The only Yiddish is the learning the Sikha.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
If I may, I would like to ask another question to Tali this time. And so,
Sure.
is there, how's the breakdown between genders? Is there more? Would you say there is more boys than girls learning Yiddish or speaking Yiddish, or is there a difference?
Well, now, I mean, it's a matter of the different schools. You see, there are two junior schools. So I think there's a boys' school and a girls' school. I'm actually not sure of the numbers in either of them, whether one is bigger than the other. And I don't think there is any real Yiddish study in the boys' junior school. And I confess that I haven't tried to find out what's happening in the girls' junior school. So I didn't do any research. I didn't ask any teachers or whatever. So I don't know. The girls' senior school, I've spoken to Mrs. Unick, Golda Unick, and other people, and people who used to go to the school. But there's also the boys' senior school. Now, the boys' senior school used to be in Stamford Hill. Now it's in Golders Green somewhere. And there was very interesting because there were teachers who did not know English at all. Reb Moshe Katzenellenberg and Oliver Sholem, he used to teach Gemara, a brilliant person, couldn't speak a word of English. And Levi Paris now does speak English, but a bit. He spoke Yiddish in the class, and the boys really learned from him. They gained a lot from him. So I don't know. I mean, that's really, to try and find out anything about numbers, one would have to try, and work out how many people are here, there, what the numbers were at any particular time. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thanks. Thank you anyways. Mm-hmm.
Izzy, there is one question for you from David Brown.
Yeah, I grew up in Satmar in Stamford Hill. So we were the big rivals of Habad. Tali and I were actually neighbors growing up. I grew up on Colberg Place, 7 Colberg Place. But I don't think we knew each other because we were Satmar and Tali was.
That's actually what I was asking. What Kehila in terms of Yiddishkeit background?
Yeah.
Wait, your father ran a some kind of like a lot of people would get jobs by your father. There was some kind of
No, that's a cousin. That's Michael Posen, a cousin, a Yekische cousin actually. We were the Hasidim, the Satmara, number 7 Colberg Place.
Yeah, no, I remember you. I don't remember you, but I remember your family.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I think your father had some kind, I don't mean Michael Posen who runs in Aguda. I mean, your father had some kind of job placement where various people who needed a job would come to your father and he would be able to give them a job of some kind, no?
Not my father.
No, die stamping?
Unless he lived a double life for his kids.
All right, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry we never met.
Not too late.
It worked out in the end.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? Tell me if I don't see one. So this is actually a good timing. We are only 18 minutes late, right? So thank you very much, Tali. That was an excellent talk and extremely interesting. And if you could show us these materials, these photos, which I couldn't read everything written there, I would be very grateful.
Okay, I'll try and do them. Yeah.
And thank you for everyone for coming and asking.
Well, and thank you to the whole team, Sonia, Lily, Zoe, and everyone else, you know, working on this, and Izzy.
Yeah, thank you.
Make it happen. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
This was our inaugural attempt at simultaneous translation Yiddish to English. So we'd like to do more of these in the series.
If I may, if anyone here who listened to the English one can tell me if it worked, because this is, as Lily said, the first time we did it, and maybe we can say see if we want to do it again. So anyone who listened to the English, did it work? Was it understandable? Yeah, all right.
Yay.
Yeah, it was very good.
Wonderful.
So before we go, I just wanted to mention that the next talk in the series is going to be on Tuesday, the 12th of January. We have a little bit of a break. So it's like kind of 6 weeks instead of a month. And that's going to be on attitudes towards change in a maintained language, Yiddish in New York, Hasidic Yiddish in New York by Isaac Bleeman of UC Berkeley. And we'll be sending out the notifications and the announcements and setting up the Eventbrite link in the usual way. And you can always check if you're interested in the series. I'll just put the link to our website here because that will have all of the details of the upcoming talks. And as soon as the Eventbrite link goes up, you can register for the next one. So we will probably put the Eventbrite link up like maybe 3 weeks to a month beforehand, and then we'll send out the messages in the usual way.
Thank you.
So see you on the 12th of January.
Looking forward. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Schönen Dank, Tali.
Dank. Dank.
I'm going to have to go. So goodbye, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You were
Bye,
amazing translator. I was listening and I was wondering if you're going to get very tired because you were so intensely on time. So it was great.
Yeah, I struggled one bit. I struggled when he started reading the Sikh of the Rebbe, and there's lots of like Hebrew words, and I was like, okay, I don't know how to translate this.
Yeah.
Once he said he was in action, and you just said he was in action.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was amazingly in sync, actually. And at the beginning, he spoke so fast, I was worried that he was going to tire you out, like your brain. But anyway, I really got to run. But see you.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Susie.
I think.
Sorry, just because I'm recording. So what happens if I leave? It will ask me what to do with the recording, or I have to stop the recording first.
Just stop the recording, I think.
It doesn't matter, actually.
Yeah, I think it will. Mine recorded everything up until the end of the Q&As, and then it said that it ran out of space. But I think that, and I don't know where it's gone, but I'll figure it out.
You'll get
on my computer, apparently.
You get an email when it's ready because it has to convert it, and then Zoom.
Oh yeah, that's right, of course. Okay.
First, the Chinese and the KGB listen to it.
Great. Bye.